America first. But at what cost? The United States and Canada have long been the closest of allies, sharing the longest undefended border in the world. Their economies are deeply intertwined. But what happens when a leader decides that fairness is no longer enough? When economic cooperation turns into a battleground? This is the story of how former President Donald Trump's tariffs against Canada triggered a chain reaction, a full-blown trade war that could change the future of North American commerce forever. The beginning of the conflict. It all started with a simple claim: America is getting ripped off. Trump, known for his aggressive stance on trade, had long criticized U.S. economic deals as being unfair. But when he turned his focus to Canada, America's largest trading partner, the consequences were seismic. In 2018, Trump imposed steep tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, citing national security concerns. That's right, Canada, one of America's closest allies, was suddenly labeled a threat to U.S. national security. The move sparked outrage in Ottawa. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the tariffs insulting and vowed retaliation. And retaliate they did. Canada slapped counter tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting everything from steel to ketchup, from whiskey to maple syrup. The message was clear: if the U.S. wanted to play hardball, Canada wouldn't back down. The fallout. Economic pain on both sides. The tariffs sent shockwaves through both economies. In the U.S., industries that relied on Canadian imports, like auto manufacturing and construction, saw costs skyrocket. American farmers, already struggling with previous trade disruptions, now faced higher export taxes when selling to Canada. And in Canada, the tariffs hit hard. The country's steel and aluminum sectors, which exported billions to the U.S., suffered major losses. Small businesses were caught in the crossfire, forced to pay higher prices for raw materials. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just businesses feeling the pain. Ordinary Americans and Canadians saw higher prices on everyday goods. The cost of cars, appliances, and even beer shot up. Tariffs weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were attacks on consumers. Alaska caught in the crossfire. As tensions escalated, an unexpected battleground emerged: Alaska. Most Americans don't realize just how dependent Alaska is on Canada. The state is geographically separated from the U.S. mainland, meaning almost everything from food to fuel has to pass through Canadian territory. When Canada hinted at slapping tolls and new tariffs on U.S. trucks bound for Alaska, Washington panicked. The idea that Alaska's supply chain could be disrupted sent shockwaves through the state. Some Alaskans even began questioning, would this trade war make daily life unsustainable? The trade war didn't just hurt businesses and consumers, it put an entire trade agreement at risk. For decades, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, had been the backbone of economic relations between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. It eliminated tariffs and allowed goods to flow freely across borders, creating millions of jobs. But Trump, he hated NAFTA. He called it the worst trade deal ever made and threatened to rip it up completely. By 2018, negotiations to update NAFTA were in full swing. Canada and Mexico were willing to modernize the agreement, but Trump wanted something different: total domination in trade deals. He wanted to rename it, rewrite it, and force Canada to accept harsher terms. At one point, he even excluded Canada from the negotiations entirely, pushing Mexico into a deal first and leaving Trudeau's government scrambling. The tension was so high that behind closed doors, Trump reportedly said, "We're just going to tariff their cars. The Canadian economy will collapse in a few days." Economic warfare, the auto industry threat. If Trump had followed through on his threat to tariff Canadian-made cars, it would have been catastrophic. Here's why. Canada's auto industry is deeply integrated with America's. Cars and parts cross the border multiple times before they're finished products. Tariffs would have meant massive job losses on both sides, higher prices for American cars, disruptions to supply chains. Even Republican lawmakers warned Trump that hitting Canada's auto sector would cause economic devastation in key swing states like Michigan and Ohio. But Trump didn't care. He doubled down. During one fiery speech, he declared, "Canada has been taking advantage of us for decades. No more." Public backlash. Farmers, business owners, and workers speak out. By mid-2018, the backlash against the trade war was impossible to ignore. Farmers, already struggling with tariffs from China, were now losing key markets in Canada. Automakers and steelworkers feared layoffs, and even conservative business groups started begging the Trump administration to call off the tariffs. Polls showed that while Americans supported being tough on trade, they didn't want to pay the price for it. The message was clear. Trump's tariffs weren't hurting Canada as much as they were hurting Americans themselves. By late 2018, tensions between Trump and Trudeau had reached a boiling point. At the G7 summit in Quebec, Trump arrived furious. He had just imposed tariffs on Canada, and Trudeau was pushing back, calling the tariffs insulting and vowing that Canada would not be pushed around. Trump didn't like that. Before leaving the summit early, he fired off a series of angry tweets, personally attacking Trudeau. PM Justin Trudeau of Canada acted so meek and mild during our G7 meetings, only to give a news conference after I left saying that US tariffs were kind of insulting and he will not be pushed around. Very dishonest and weak. The message was clear. Trump wanted to break Canada's resistance, the USMCA deal, a trade war victory. But behind the scenes, both countries knew they couldn't keep up this trade war forever. By late 2018, after months of economic pain, market uncertainty, and business pressure, Trump, Trudeau, and Mexico's leaders finally agreed on a revised version of NAFTA, the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Trump declared victory, boasting that the new deal was a huge win for America. But was it? What really changed? Canada kept most of its trade privileges. Dairy concessions were small, just a few percentage points. Auto industry rules changed, but in ways that increased costs for U.S. companies too. In reality, USMCA was more of a rebranding than a revolution. Trump got a new name on the deal, but the economic framework remained largely the same. For all the drama, all the tariffs, and all the threats, Canada had not been crushed. The real cost. Who paid the price? So after all the trade war rhetoric, after all the economic pain, what did the tariffs actually achieve? For the U.S. billions in higher costs for American consumers, farmers lost key export markets, manufacturers struggled with higher steel and aluminum prices, job losses in industries dependent on Canadian trade for Canada, short-term economic slowdown, businesses adapted, shifting focus to Europe and Asia, public opinion hardened against Trump's America, and most ironically, despite all his tough talk, Trump eventually lifted the steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada in 2019. Why? Because U.S. businesses simply couldn't afford them anymore. Did Trump's tariffs work? If the goal was to pressure Canada into submission, they failed. If the goal was to win over American voters with a show of strength, they backfired. And if the goal was to reshape North American trade, well, USMCA looks a lot like the old NAFTA. The trade war's lasting impact. Looking back, Trump's trade war with Canada wasn't really about economics. It was about power, politics, and PR. It was about Trump proving he was a tough negotiator. It was about appealing to his base, even if that meant hurting American businesses. And in the end, the U.S. paid the price. So was Trump's trade war with Canada a smart strategy or a reckless gamble? Did it strengthen America's position or just hurt American workers? And most importantly, will the next president repeat the same mistakes? Let us know what you think in the comments. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into global geopolitics. Thanks for watching Econ Atlas, where the world of economics meets the power of strategy.